Is that working at all? I hope that's working. Yeah, I can see the mic is working there. Oh, I'm starting to hear myself now. The problem is I can hear myself twice now, which is rather eerie. Okay, everybody. I'm going to start. I don't know if anyone can hear me, but I'm going to rattle away with this performance and hope that you can actually get some understanding of what I'm saying. This is all a bit of an experiment for me, and I hope it goes okay. The problem is I can hear myself on delay now, which is really frustrating. So I'm going to try and cope with that, and maybe I just turn myself down. And hopefully that won't interfere with you being able to hear me. So anyway, welcome to my first Archaeodeath YouTube live chat, which is going to be actually the Q&A for a session I have been doing. For the Chester Society for Landscape History. And I hope that some of the Chester Society for Landscape History are here listening to me doing this presentation. So the idea is that I was invited to give a talk about Offers Dyke, a watery perspective. And indeed, you can see that presentation split into two halves on my YouTube Archaeodeath channel. So you can just simply roll back a few episodes, a few individual sections, and you can watch those videos. And in those videos, I outline my arguments of an ongoing piece of work. It's not completed and I haven't published it yet, so I do appreciate feedback and ideas and thoughts on that work. And I present my ideas about Offers Dyke and its maritime and riverine and wetland and watery dimensions. So I hope that you enjoy this talk, because what I'm going to do now is wrap up, give a quick synopsis of that talk, and then I'm going to go forward and answer the questions that the Chester Society for Landscape History members have pitched my way. And they are 4, and they're brilliant questions, and I will try my best to answer them. And then if there's any additional questions that come through in the live chat, which I think, yes, someone's already added something. So please ask me questions. I shall add it to it. And I shall try and add any other thoughts and issues to that as I go along. Um, basically, my talk was called Offers Dyke, a Watery Perspective, and it was an attempt to explore the relationship of Offers Dyke to watercourses. Now, this is something that has not really been achieved before, and it's something that I've only just started doing and exploring because of some inspiration I had looking at Offers Dyke in the landscape. I hope to publish it at some point, maybe in the Offers Dyke Journal, which I co-edit, and is the volume 2 of which is coming out, and call for papers for volume 3 is out very soon. Now, in addition to that, everyone understands that Offers Dyke is phenomenal, Britain's largest ancient earthwork, which traverses what is now the Anglo-Welsh borderlands. And here's a view of it looking over the Unk Valley in the Clun Forest. And I talk about how Keith Rayan in Baptist's book articulate it as a landscape with a connective purpose. The linear earthwork has a connective purpose of connecting up very different topographies, not simply about defining a line, a border line. Instead, this is an earthwork that is controlling a landscape of frontier that extends to its west. In other words, that the Mercian kingdom in the late 8th century who are building this monument are not building it to define a territorial edge. They are using it as a structure to control movement in a landscape, north and south and east and west. So they're interested in controlling and dominating land to the west of its line. And in addition to that, they're interested in controlling the landscape to its east. So it's about controlling and observing the landscape in all directions. In addition to that, they talk about in their book length study, which I have here, and you can buy in all good bookshops. And if you can't, it can't be a good bookshop. Offers Dyke, Landscape and Hegemony, or Hegemony, depending on the way you say it, in 8th century Britain. And this book, very detailed and extensive book with lots of lovely photographs, takes you on a journey of exploring the different scales of which we can understand this monument. Now, there are debates about whether Offers Dyke continues in the north to the sea. There's debates about how it crosses the Herefordshire Plain and how it relates to watercourses right the way down to the Severn. But in general terms, the problem with previous studies, apart from the debate about whether it runs to the sea as an empirical question, have not really dealt with its riverine and watery interactions. And certainly because it doesn't run to the sea as a demonstrable earthwork at Prestatyn, the Offers Dyke Path does, but the Offers Dyke Monument doesn't. The whole question is, does it run to how does it relate to the sea and watercourses has been underplayed. So what I did in my talk was I conceded that some of this work has already been done. Tim Malim's work, for example, here looks at the relationship between Roman roads and watercourses. And also, you can see that its role as a monument, the purple line on this map, is blocking and controlling the major rivers pouring out of the Welsh uplands into the plains of what becomes England, or the western Midlands, Cheshire, Shropshire, Herefordshire, Gloucestershire. Okay, so you get a sense of that and the scale of the monument, built in a couple of seasons, maybe only, or over a longer period of time with a smaller gang of individuals involved, perhaps between 2,500 and 5,000 plus individuals. Although I did make the point in my talk that doesn't take into account beacons, watchtowers, gates, settlements, forts, tracks, and the vast work of deforestation that may have been associated with building this linear earthwork. Now, in addition to all of that, I went through and looked at some specific examples, and I'll come back to this example. I used the phrase, which I'm not sure if it's appropriately defined, that it's got a biaxial dimension. When we're thinking of linear earthworks, we're thinking about movement across its line being blocked, controlled, and in this case, blocking the valley of the Ceiriog, and the black line, if you didn't guess, is Offers Dyke, and the arrows don't really exist on the ground. They're just things I stuck on the map. I'm sure you knew that. And I've just put a simplified contour map here where Chirk Castle is being traversed by the monument, and The photograph here shows the line of Dyke running down into the Kerryog Valley, and there's the later 13th century plus castle sitting up, looming above it, which would be a wonderful place if the Mercians had strategically put a fort or just simply a watchtower at that location. That would have done a really strategic job in connecting up blind spots of as the Dyke moves through the landscape. It would have been an imposing, monumental in position on the land, but it's also about controlling the river and controlling movement along the river as well as across the rivers behind it. Now, we don't have any demonstrable tracks or roads like Roman linear earthworks running behind the monument that can sort of give us that sense of a frontier system in the same way as, say, Hadrian's Wall or the Antonine frontier, but we can anticipate whether immediately behind the Dyke or some distance back there would have been trackways where traffic could move along its line. So I think the Dyke is protecting traffic moving north-south as well as controlling traffic moving east and west. But we see it in a landlocked perspective, as I argued in my previous talks. Wonderful view by Julian Ravist here from aerial photography at Hergen Corner, where you can see the Dyke doing an angled turn, as it's called by Keith Rainey and Bapty, at a very significant location which may have been an original gateway. Obviously, the lines through it here are later post-medieval tracks cutting through the earthwork, but what you can gain a sense of here, we can't be sure exactly. Obviously, that's a massive gouge of a post-medieval track. We can't be exactly sure where the original gate was and how it looked, but the suspicion is here that the behaviour of this monument is to funnel traffic towards that corner, and there may have been only a very small, narrow aperture through the Dyke that could be controlled as a gateway, a single tall, thin gateway allowing one horseman or one cow through, or sheep at a time, to that kind of narrow controlling access point. But all of this is thinking in landlocked terms. And here's some other views of it. This is the way we understand and experience the monument. And I talked about how the monument is generally seen as a walking experience in summer season when it's dry. We may go in winter when it's very wet and muddy, but we'd still see it as a land experience. The earthwork survives best away from watercourses. By definition, watercourses over the last 1100 years since its construction will have damaged it in the valley bottoms, will have washed it away. So we don't often see it in juxtaposition with watercourses, and we often talk about it as a land feature, a land division, an earthwork, a linear earthwork, a linear monument, and so we by definition see it as an endeavour that's a work of land. And we often think about it as linked to land travel, trade, communication, territory, conflict, power and territory. All appears landlocked in our discussions. And there's no consistent research focusing on its relationship with watercourses. And I made 5 key arguments, which are at different stages of development, and you can take or leave as you please. But the first point is, this is going from Ray and Bapty's map, that we can see the green line in this case is Dyke, the brown line is Dyke. I'm talking to the Holt Historical Society next month about Dyke, so join me on YouTube for that one. I feel like it's now a digital gravy train of online talks, but anyway, but I thought I'd do Dyke for this one. But you can see from this map how Dyke is wrapping around, defining the division between the uplands and the lowlands, but is also connecting up watercourses. And I made the point that in addition to that long distance connectivity between the Irish Sea and the Bristol Channel and the key watersheds along the line, the Dee, the Severn, and the Y, you can also see how it in some places, the linear earthwork is running along hills overlooking key river valleys. So the valley, it's almost monumentalizing the whole landscape of large watercourses. So the river becomes almost part of the Dyke, because while the Dyke is probably running up here somewhere, and actually I'm standing on a bit where it disappears at Redbrook. That's Redbrook on the River Wye, with the railway bridge running across it. A very beautiful scene. Really, this entire landscape is being turned into a frontier monument. And the construction of this monument would have involved not only the digging of the bank and ditch, but the wholesale clearance of the hillside of woodland, and perhaps even stakes along the river, observation towers down there. We have to think about this as a bristling frontier of observation and control rather than simply a bank and ditch. And these are the key points where this is the stylized stances of the Dyke as portrayed in Ray and Baptiste's work. And the blue circles are the key points where the river actually becomes the Dyke. And we don't know whether the Dyke continued along it or the river replaced it. A third point is there are points where the river is the Dyke is actually overlooking the river, and this is the section to the north, and this is from Cyril Fox's map. The yellow is Watts Dyke, showing the main stretches of Watts Dyke that overlook river valleys, and the purple is the bits of Offa's Dyke that deliberately overlook valleys and control movement along the valleys. In addition to that, a fourth point I made was that another strategy of the Dyke, when it's not following river valleys, it's crossing them and it's blocking them. And these are the nodes to the north. These are the points to the north where Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke block and control movement along river valleys. Now, we often don't know the detail of how the Dyke behaves when it's down by those river courses because the water has been running for 1100 years and washed away all of the evidence that we would like to have surviving close to those locations. But at least we can see that rivers and controlling rivers and streams is a principal function of the Dyke in these sort of thresholds of the upland territories that it's controlling. I also made a fifth point, and this is a bit speculative, and it's a point I'm developing that no one seems to have made before, and that's about how in some locations the line of the Dyke makes a compromise, and it doesn't do what it usually does, which is optimize to cross rivers at perpendicular to their line. It decides to actually cut across floodplains west of the main line of the river, therefore leaving a series of islands between multiple streams and the line of the Dyke, almost like fortified little spots. And I suggest that these may have been the locations where this happens may have been actually quite strategic. This wasn't just anywhere. These were special locations where the Dyke made a conscious choice not to do perhaps the most logical strategic thing. So here at Frith, near Hope Mountain and the Keddigog, you can see Mount Zion here, the heights of Mount Zion, where Offa's Dyke runs over the top and then drops down dramatically into the Keddigog Valley. But rather than take the shortest course, which I speculate with a red line here, to cross the Keddigog and then follow it, it heads west somewhat and takes a straight line. You can see that bold, you could see that as stupid, or you could see that as strategic. But whatever it is, it creates these Dyke islands to its east, little pockets where pasture land via the river would be protected by the Dyke itself and the streams. And I argue this is perhaps an ideal location for mustering troops, horseback riders, for attack, for collecting together tribute and traded goods on the hoof, be it geese, be it cattle, be it sheep, goats, goods coming from the west. You could store them up here on a regular summer basis. So I think of these sites as perhaps not forts, but as lowland assembly, market, and mustering sites. And then finally, my sixth point was there may have been also, as well as the socio-political and economic aspects of water management, we've got to also think about perhaps potential holy associations, sacral associations of water. And we can pick these out much more possibly for Watts Dyke, which is a monument that's still not properly dated, but we think might be slightly later than Offa's Dyke. But we also have some evidence that maybe Offa's Dyke may be connected to not only avoiding springs, but perhaps enwrapping springs that may have had sacral associations. And this is an idea that really hasn't been allowed to flourish with our focus on the economic and socio-political dimensions of these linear earthworks. It would seem almost surplus to requirements for them to be any holy or symbolic association of the places that are being controlled. But no, and I suggest at least with the case of, while the evidence is later, of St Winifred's Well and of Basingstoke Abbey, the Cistercian monastery on the Dee estuary, we have to at least entertain the possibility that these locations had a prior significance um, that was being controlled by the presence of the monument, and that the monument may have been chosen these locations not simply for strategic reasons, because they were co-opting earlier sacral features. And we can think of Oswestry and and the well and the church site at Oswestry and Old Oswestry Hill Fort. We can think of the Holy Well. So, in summarising my paper, which I go into more detail, this is a rapid summary. I say that there may be at least 6 hydraulic dimensions to Offa's Dyke that we need to explore further. The sea to sea rhetoric of Asser, the biographer of Alfred the Great, saying that Offa, this ancient king, built a monument from sea to sea, is something that we still haven't demonstrated actually took place. But perhaps we do need to take it more seriously, because even if it didn't run to the sea, it controlled coastal and riverine relationships heading towards the sea. The rivers may have operated as dikes along key stretches of the Dee, the Vunwy, the Severn, and the Wye. That the Dyke was obsessed with surveying its line, utilizing ravines and valley sides, but also blocking rivers at key and carefully selected locations. That it may, in some selected instances, have deliberately created Dyke islands to its east, combining the confluences of rivers with the line of the Dyke. And then 6, I suggest we need to explore at least the possibility of riparian identities and holy waters being curtailed and controlled through the line of Offa's Dyke. I did mention Bangor on Dee, a point that Keith Ray and Ian Baptiste flag up as an important Welsh monastery that was blocked by the presence of Offa's Dyke blocking the Dee. So there are some outstanding questions we still have to explore about the defensive redirections of watercourses. Did that happen? Were there other features that we haven't even looked for? And this is the thing about Offa's Dyke, is that perhaps these features are there and we just need to look for them and see what is possible. So was Offa's Dyke, when it crossed river plains, operating as a kind of dam, allowing water to be ponded for water power? Was there any causeways, bridges, and gates and water mills associated with the Dyke? I mean, I don't know. I mean, we just haven't looked for these questions. And how did the Dyke relate to river transport? Were there barge gutters, blind loads, and other features we know from later centuries that were connected to the way the dikes run across plains and into major water courses? Now, that's my quick summing up of earlier lectures for those of you that didn't watch it. And I just wanted to sort of add to that by answering some questions that have been pitched by members of the Chester Society for Landscape History. Now, the first one from Ian Ray, it says, much enjoyed Howard's talk and his enthusiasm. It left me ruminating about what a frontier is, a fixed line on a map or a contested zone. And whether frontiers are fixed or movable, as in the American frontier. Questions I haven't thought about since I was a geography undergraduate. Okay, well, there's some interesting points there that I want to I want to address there. And so, with this context, so that's his backstory. Um, he has a specific questions. So, with this in context, is it possible that the Dyke was, in part, simply a demarcation of property rights in an age before maps and lawyers, turning a contested zone into a tangible, if essentially symbolic, line on the ground map? This leads to the whole question. There's been a lot of writing about Offa's Dyke being merely symbolic, that it would never have worked, it would never have been an effective boundary. And my answer to that, in relation to the overall line of the earthwork, is that we are looking at a monument that was of a scale and a character, where it's been excavated, where it's been surveyed and investigated, that it was a demonstrably substantial monument. It would have been huge. The recent excavations by Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust at Chirk Park have shown that the monument is of a huge. The ditch is huge. Now, we don't know if that was everywhere that length, but the ditch was up to 3 meters deep, and the ditch alone would have been stopped any movement of horse riders or cattle or sheep across that landscape. Combine that with a massive bank, with a revetted wall or palisade on top, and also think about thorn bushes that may have been planted along it, stakes. And of course, the fact is that these monuments were not just about stopping hordes of invading white walkers or barbarian Welsh. It was about being able to see them moving through the landscape. And in that regard, it's important to think that this would have been an imposing monumental barrier. It was a monumental barrier. So that may have been symbolic, but it wasn't symbolism in the absence of being an effective barrier. And that's the key point. A lot of people have said, well, it was a grand gesture of labour mobilisation to make a monument comparable to that of the ancient Roman emperors, that Offa was portraying himself like a Roman emperor. Sure, and I concede all that, but that doesn't mean it wasn't an effective monument in itself. And I don't think it would have had any symbolism if it didn't actually stop people moving through the landscape. But does that mean it was an impenetrable barrier that people couldn't curtail, circumvent, and occasionally break through? No, of course not. I'm not saying that, but like all walls, I think it was built to impose and impress and to make a statement that was linked to an ideological conception of the world, of an imperial power that Offa was trying to assert. But he had to do that. The only way to do that was to make a monument of a scale that actually made sense. Now, in answer to your question, I think it is a tangible and a symbolic monument. But I don't think it was about property rights, and I don't think it was actually on a border line. We have no evidence that this line makes any sense in later centuries, and if anything, it may have only been used for a less than one generation. If anything, it's running in a line that is about controlling the landscape to its front and controlling the landscape to its rear, rather than that point in the landscape being of particular significance. And that relates back to the former point you make about, do we understand Offa's Dyke as a fixed or movable line like the American frontier? Well, I think Mercia was seeing a frontier zone it was hoping to dominate territories on both sides of this monument, both east and west. And in that regard, I think we're looking at a monument that was about, perhaps was seen by Offa not as a point of an end point, but as a starting point to allow him to dominate lands to the west. So, in many ways, I suppose my take on this and the way it's controlling rivers and controlling streams, controlling water and resources, and pre-existing routes through the landscape is it's all about controlling in peace and war the landscape and dominating the land to the west as much as controlling the people to its east, dividing and conquering. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I think the problem is we can't see Offa's Dyke as a solution. We have to see it as an aspirant attempt to control a landscape. We don't know if it was successful or not, and we don't know for how long it was in active use in doing a job that it was imagined to have done. All we can see is the monument. And so I suppose that is my answer, is that we don't know if it was effective and enduring, and in many ways, the fact that so little of the Anglo-Welsh border follows its line suggests that actually it was perhaps redundant within a generation. But it was trying to do a job that was, I don't think, a finished job. It wasn't trying to say, this is the end of it. This is blocking in the Welsh. That's a Welsh perspective. He wasn't trying to do that. He was trying to take over the Welsh. It was about domination, about hegemony, about intimidation and control. I follow Keith Ray on that whole area, I think, and I'm sure he would say it differently, but that's my take on it. Now, hello, I'm going way ahead of myself. I just want to make the point that one of the things that I said in my lecture, and I want to reiterate here, is that we need to stop seeing Offa's Dyke and Wat's Dyke in relation to only the land immediately to its west and east. And I've turned Britain on its side here and showed the relationship to the Irish Sea and Bristol Channel and the peoples of the Irish Sea and the Bristol Channel, from Cornwall to Gloissing and Dyfed, to the kingdoms of Ireland, Man, and the Welsh kingdoms along the north coast, as all integral to the audience of the monument. I also think we have to think about the linear earthwork in relation to the audiences that the dike is facing at its ends. So at the southern end, Sedbury Cliffs, you're looking over to territory claimed and taken from the West Saxons. And I think this is as much a snub and a face-off against the West Saxons as it is against Gwent. Likewise, in the north, while there is debate about whether Offa's Dyke went to the sea, this isn't simply about facing off the Welsh. This is about audiences up the Lancashire and Cumbria coast. In other words, the other powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. So I think Mercia, by building this monument, and if Offa is the main instigator and commissioner of the monument, then let's say Offa, although we can't prove that for sure at this stage. We have to think of a monument that is really speaking out to all audiences, north, south, east, and west, about the power or the aspired power of Offa and his kingdom. Question 2 from Christine Robinson. In part 2 of your talk, in discussing the route of the Dyke takes crossing rivers and streams, you briefly mentioned that watercourses might have changed over time. Is it at all possible to determine if this happened from so long ago and before there was reliable documentary evidence? Now, I will concede immediately that I'm not a hydrologist and I don't understand, I'm not a physical geographer, and I don't fully understand the historical development of these rivers. All I would say is that it's my very strong suspicion that these streams and rivers get out into broader floodplains, then we are dealing with more ambiguous situations. But I think in these tighter upland valleys, as the two examples I showed here, of crossing the Gwenflo and crossing the Clywedog, Offa's Dyke is in a landscape that has changed little. These streams not only haven't moved, but cannot move. There's no other way they could go in the landscape. And indeed, the fact that at the Clywedog we can still see Offa's Dyke crossing on the bottom of the very tight, narrow valley floor and only broken by the line of the stream today suggests that there's been no movement of the streams in these locations. And therefore, I think we can be quite confident that when we're talking about how the dike is behaving now, it is mappable onto the past. We don't know exact vegetation cover. Obviously there's been massive changes in the Clywedog Valley. Plas Power and the woodland there is to do with the Industrial Revolution. It's not indicative of how the historic woodland would have looked like, but I think it would have been wooded before being cleared to allow lines of sight from the dike. At the Gwenfro, likewise, we can't reconstruct in that detail, but I think we can be confident that we've got the dike and the stream in a relationship that is today as it was. There with other river valleys and river crossings such as the Camlad and the Lug, I think we have more challenging questions, but also greater potential that the dike may have waterlogged deposits and piling to cross that plains that might be worthy of excavation to actually get radiocarbon dates and to work out how the dike managed the more complex and seasonally fluctuating watercourses. It was sort of rivers in a more mature situation. So I'm not an expert in this. I won't. I'm happy to be correct in the details, but I think at least with some of these cases we can be confident. In other cases, there's more questionable. Question 3 is from Professor Graham White. Given that it is believed that the whole of Offa's Dyke is of a singular design, and that's Ray and Bapty's argument really, and they make the case of similar design features up and down the monument, erected in one or perhaps two seasons of work, says Graham, and we don't know, but that's a reasonable general assumption that it could have been done in a few years, perhaps as much as 5-10 years, but certainly needn't be that long. It's a big engineering work, but nothing that a few thousand people couldn't do over a couple of years. What does this suggest about the organisation of the project? Should we envisage a master planner or director devolving responsibility for different sections to a team of assistants? A single person or a group of people together surveying the entire route would have taken well over a year of preliminary work, I would have thought. I think that's a very good thought. More likely would have been locally based teams implementing a common overall design strategy. Is anything known about how comparable projects were managed and organised, e.g., the continental canals which were cited? Now, this is a really great multifaceted point that Graham's making here, and I would say that the first point is that we have very little evidence of where people were living in the contemporary landscape. I don't think we can imagine the area immediately around the Dyke as particularly populated. This is a frontier zone, and I think that even if there's been two models been suggested of local levies being brought in to build the Dyke, which could have been taken from the Welsh as well as the sort of Anglo-Saxon territories to the east, but or British from both sides, Welsh-speaking people from both sides, or we actually have people bringing in labour from other parts of the Mercian kingdom to do the work. Now, I don't see how we archaeologically discern between those two hypotheses, and I would say there's a lot of likely in between, that you're bringing people to this region, but not necessarily from a massive distance, but from more populous parts of eastern Shropshire, Staffordshire, Worcestershire, and northern Gloucestershire, rather than this, not people living literally next to the Dyke. I don't think it was an intensively utilised landscape in that regard. But that's not the question Graham's asking. He's about who built it, but who was planning it. And I think that there's been a bit of a fantasy that somehow Offa is standing there, hand on hips, going, "Build it there. No, 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 left a bit." And maybe not. I mean, all I would say is that the landscape features that we see being built and used on Offa's Dyke, we can also see in Wands Dyke in Wessex. We can see on Watts Dyke, and we can also see many of them on Hadrian's Wall, which I think is one of the key inspirations for the monument's appearance. They look different to us, but I think the idea was to build a modern Hadrian's Wall in the 8th century. And so I would suggest that perhaps what we're looking at is informed observers of Britain who know the ancient earthworks of Britain and the more recent earthworks of Britain, because we don't know when Wands Dyke was exactly built, who are then bringing these designs into Offa's Dyke, adapting them to localities, but implementing them in a very consistent way in different geologies and in different kinds of topography. Now, the monument survives today in different heights, and it's been damaged in different ways, but there are some underlying key themes, and Ray and Bapty outline them in their book, including the adjusted, segmented design. But I don't. This is one of the key points on Rushock Hill, where you can still see this striking change of alignment of the Dyke in straight line segments. Here, looking, this is on Rushock Hill again. You can see 3 segments here in changed alignment. Ignore the cute sheep; they're nothing to do with my talk. They were just getting in the way. Actually, they're quite good for scale. You can see the scale of that bang. It doesn't look very big at first glance if there weren't sheep there, but the sheep are actually useful. They show that that's about 1.5 meters of height, if I can guess my height of sheep. In addition to that, you can see these straight line reorganizations through the landscape. So this is a regular planning, and we can see that elsewhere. I mean, Ray and Bapty discussed this in their book. This is a zoom lens shot up Hawthorne Hill, and you can see 1 section, 2 sections, 3 sections, 4 sections, 4 straight lines. And elsewhere, such as at Dudston Field, Ray and Bapty suggest these are 20 to 80 metre long straight sections. So there's nowhere the Dyke actually curves. It's all built in straight sections, and it sort of shimmies its way across the landscape, if that's the right word. Shimmy? I don't know. In these adjusted segments. That suggests a degree of planning and organisation. But I don't know if looking to the continent gives us any specific views. The other problem I would say, Graham, is that we have to bear in mind it's very easy to imply intent from arbitrary choices. And this is why I have a problem with my own argument about the Dyke Islands, is that it's easy for me to say, oh, well, why didn't they build it this way? Why did they build it that way? When we don't know the range of compromises and choices being made in establishing the monument in relation to what they wanted to do, because we can't get inside their minds of their surveyors. Maybe there were challenges that would have been faced or problems if they had done this that it wouldn't have been able to achieve if it had gone straight over the river valley. We don't know. What I would say though is that the way we get about around that is a lot of the work that my doctoral student Liam Delaney is doing in actually trying to model different options for how the dike may have worked through the landscape using least cost pathway analysis, using different factors, and that helps to pin down how it wasn't designed. If it was a road or a pipeline, it would have been designed differently. And that, at least, it doesn't tell us how it doesn't allow us to get into the minds of past designers, but it does at least allow us to rule out other possibilities. Question 4 from Carol Sparks. Although built by the English, has Offa's ever been used by the Welsh as a boundary or to defend themselves from the English or from anyone else? Did it have any role to play in the invasion plans for World War II, etc.? And this is a really interesting question, because you would think that a monument of that scale would have had an enduring significance, and it does in some regards. Certainly in Anne Williams's review and in the volume 1 of the Offa's Dyke Journal, which I shall promote. You can buy it from Archaeopress or you can download it for free. Um, you will see her review of the historical sources, which makes very clear that by the 12th century, looking back to the campaigns of Harold Godwinson and 1063, Offa's was perceived to be a legal boundary between the Welsh and the English. It was perceived, it had come to be seen as a legal boundary in a fashion that fits more with our modern understanding of what a frontier work should be. But I'm not sure it would have ever had that in the 8th century. I think this is very much a later creation. So John of Salisbury says that Welshmen who would lose their right hand if found east of Offa's Dyke, whereas Walter Map says that the Welshman would lose a foot. So the Welshman would lose something. A hand is obviously worse, but then at least you can run back to Wales and tell them. But if you lose a foot, you're unlikely to be hopping very fast. The description of Wales by Gerald of Wales in 1194 records the context of Earl Harold's campaign of 1063 in relation to this story. So we can certainly see that in later centuries, Offa's Dyke did become a perceived boundary between the English and the Welsh, and is already, by Asser's account in the 9th century, it was seen to be walling in the Welsh. This idea of to wall against the Welsh, but I don't know if that was ever its original intent. And what they thought of in the 12th century has nothing necessarily to do with what happened 4 centuries earlier. In addition to that, in answer to Carol's point, I would say that there are other earthworks in Europe that do have life histories, do have multiple stages of iteration and reiteration. And most famously, we have the Dannevirke across the Jutlandic Peninsula, which we now can date back to the sort of at least the 3rd century AD, and before the 8th century was running across the watershed, connecting and controlling the Schlei Fjord and its streams with the Treen and the Eider. And then we have extensions in the 8th century to control this narrow neck of land across the Jutlandic Peninsula. Is then augmented by the 10th century in the late Viking Age, by an extra dike, and then it continues in use into the 12th century, and indeed is refortified in the Danish-Prussian wars of the 19th century. So it has it comes up to the modern era as a line of significance. But Offa's Dyke doesn't seem to have done the same. There's no evidence of it being rebuilt. In the recent TV show The Last Kingdom, I don't know if it's directly copying Bernard Cornwell's novel in this respect, you do have Halvar suggesting in a drunken party just before his forces are slaughtered by the Vikings in ways that defy history. You do have he sort of says, let's rebuild Offa's Dyke and make it face the English. Almost like that. And there is a point there, even though if that's totally fantasy, that Offa's Dyke has a more powerful, enduring, imaginative resonance for the people it was built against than the people who built it. Mercia doesn't survive the 9th century as a political entity, but we do have this continued significance of a frontier built against them by the Welsh. In fact, in many ways, Offa's Dyke defines a sense of Welsh identity. So, in that sense, as an imaginary line, it has an ongoing significance. And this is the different stages of the main ramparts being built that have been worked out by Tummerscheit and Witter in their paper in Offa's Dyke Journal, Volume 1. And you can see that the 12th century brick wall replacing earlier stages of the construction of the monument. So at locations such as this, we can think of the monument as playing a role in defining identities and defining frontier zones, but perhaps in later centuries it comes to be seen as a legal and ethnic boundary in a way that perhaps it was never intended to be. It becomes more than it was originally its original design. That's my current thinking on it anyway. Well, I've done I've answered those 4 questions, and I think moving forward, I think trying to see the Dyke as having audiences beyond its locality, I think is the point I want to emphasise, and emphasising the riverine and coastal connections is something we're going to have to do more work on and researching. So, do I have any other questions coming through from land of to internet via via YouTube live? I don't know if I can have any more questions. I've seen I've lost subscribers since I've been on air. That's always good. YouTube's a fickle place. I would say that I want to alert you to 2 forthcoming publications linked to not necessarily these ideas, but to broader work on frontiers. Last year we had a Grosvenor Museum 4th University of Chester Archaeology Student Conference, well organised by my students with my help, and together with one of that student group and another student, that's Kieran Gleave and Pauline Clark, who's Kieran is going off to do an MRes at another university. Now he's currently working commercial archaeology. Pauline's doing an MPhil PhD with me. We are editing the collection of papers on the heritage and public archaeology of frontiers and borderlands. It's a really exciting publication, first of its kind. And also, as I already mentioned, the Offa's Dyke Journal is up and running as a open access resource looking at frontiers and borderland, past and present, with a focus on archaeology in the Anglo-Welsh borders. And the second volume is we're going to finish and compile. Got 1, possibly 2 more articles to be appearing in that, and then we'll get that published by the end of the year. And the Offa's Dyke Journal 3 is looking for papers. So if you know anyone who's working on anything to do with linear frontiers, borders, earthworks, let them get in touch. I'm not sure how long to hold on to see if there's any other questions. Maybe I'll give it another minute, and then I shall say my goodbyes. Do you have any other questions or comments? And I think this if I remember how this works on YouTube, this gets uploaded and this gets put online, and you can always add your comments in due course, or get in touch with me at howard.williams@chester.ac.uk. Well, I can see there's been at least 11 watching, so I hope you can hear me and everything's been okay. So I hope that was of interest. I want to say thank you to the Chester Society for Landscape History for the invitation. They've always been kind to me and supported me in my position here over the last 11 years. Not only Graham, but many of those that are members. And I've really appreciated the digital warm welcome that you gave me, and encouragement to play with my idea of recording ahead of time and then having the live event. So I know these are difficult times. I wish you all well, and I hope that you stay safe, and as best as you can. And I hope when things return to normal, I can talk to you all face to face, perhaps about another different subject. But do look out for me on my Archaeo Death YouTube channel, and do subscribe if you feel inclined. And I hope to give further in the field presentations about linear monuments and maybe some further debates. And I will keep up to date with publications. Also, check out my Archaeodeath WordPress blog, which you can follow. And I do posts about all manner of things to do with mortuary archaeology and monuments and memory, as well as occasionally linear earthworks, such as this one, and a bit of landscape of different kinds. Oh, thank you, John, and thank you, other character Nightmare. That's it. Thank you very much for your comment. Thanks, very kind. Um, Gosh, I'm so busy. I'm almost tied to this machine at the moment as I'm busy recording. Um, I'm busy recording all my online lectures for my students, almost as if predicting that we'll be going into a sort of semi-lockdown. And not that I always get out predict what's going on in the world, but I knew that this was going to be happening. So I've been, and I've been busy recording. I hope the students are enjoying it, but they're certainly getting a lot of information, even if it's not face to face. I think there are actually some advantages to doing it this way, although I would like to see them as well. Certainly, I'm tied to this computer, so I'm gonna hop off now and get myself a strong drink and try and get some sleep before the next round of recording lectures on the Vikings for my third years, and the end of Rome, or the Roman world, Roman military at the moment, but then the course on the Roman world, Empire and Aftermath. We're going to take him through into the Anglo-Saxons and do all the Vikings and all that stuff. It's going to be good. So farewell, good night, cheerio. I shall go off now. How do I actually stop this? Who knows? Or does it just go on forever?